while our requirement was to simply create a series of states or boxes and decisions or diamonds as well as their gatekeepers. If you're like most students, you probably had a difficult time deciding just what it was you wanted to put into a flowchart. Because in the software development world, as it is in the real world, there are largely two ways to approach a problem. When we were asked to do something from the bottom up, the question became, where were we going to start in the bigger picture? For example, in this case, I might want to discover from the top-down point of view what we were talking about. So before we did our flowchart, we might want to put things in some type of a context. Using our nouns and verb way of looking at things, we may wish to depict what we have to do for a day as a series of high-level activities. And then once we see that we have several things to do that have a common theme throughout the day, like most people, you may discover that we have 3 things to do at an extremely high level. And we could pick any one of these 3 operations, whether going to, going back, or doing work, so as to support one of these 3 big picture activities. Of the 3 scenarios, we decided to focus on the first, or going to work, as our scenario, so as to create our basic flow chart. Now, starting as most of us must do with an alarm going off in the morning, I'm sure we've all had the experience of the alarm obviously failing to do its job so that we wake up late. Depending upon how much time we have in the morning, therefore, many options do present, up to and including calling in and telling people we're going to be late. But before things get really out of hand, of course, we have the chance just to speed things up a little bit more and simply omit some of the things that we normally would have to do as we get ready for today. An automatic enough way of understanding the choices that we have all had to face from time to time. The interesting thing about creating such an activity is that by the time we arrive at work, of course, we're arriving upon a state where we can easily forget about anything previous that allowed us to get to that state, of course, unless we got in trouble with the law, for example. And then all of a sudden we were even more late to work, of course, having to make that obligatory phone call when things get out of hand. Easy enough to understand. The benefit of community, however, is, for example, to present our findings to a group, only to discover that once people are at work, that they often have to go back home for lunch. And once they go back home, of course, the same activities would have to flow up to and including to going back as well as forth from work several times during a day. It's understanding that our top-level scenarios can indeed change over time, that allow our diagrams to have both a past as well as a future flavor to them, even when we're documenting things in the present. And as I'm fond of saying, understanding that any diagram that we have can have a past and a present and a future way of looking at things can allow us to be more confident in sharing our designs when we note on that design, whether it's a draft, rough draft, final draft, or whether we're talking about the past or present future in our designs as well. So it's very logical and certainly very inspiring from a confidence point of view to allow ourselves to create and provide as much metadata as we feel necessary so as to communicate the intent behind our models or our designs or our straw man illustrations, so as to not only indemnify or protect ourselves from undue and uncharitable criticism, but more importantly, to help us manage the expectations of people who are reading our document, and thereby letting them know whether we're looking for correction or input, or more importantly, whether we're looking for their final approval, because everything by now is getting ready to be locked and loaded so that we can move away from the early stages or the discussion stages and talk about what we are definitely going to be doing coming up. So it's easy to understand the documentation techniques, and I think by now it's easy to understand why we must also include some metadata or data that describes data, certainly behind the intent and audience, let alone revision of our designs. And once we understand how we can use such metadata to manage our feedback, as well as make sure that we have the type of feedback we're looking for during the various stages of our documentation efforts, is one of the most important techniques that I have discovered and use a good deal whenever I am creating documentation for use by my protected or my public users, and certainly many times even before I begin to start implementing my plans in my own private realm as well.